It all started on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. London was buzzing as usual, with people rushing about their business. I had just finished grabbing coffee with a friend when I decided to take a walk through one of the older parts of the city. It wasn't a planned walk. It was just something I did sometimes, letting the streets guide me wherever they would. As I wandered deeper into the older streets, the buildings around me seemed to change. The modern shops and cafes slowly faded away, replaced by older, weathered structures. The streets became quieter, and the sounds of the city felt distant. That's when I saw it, an old building, tucked away between two more modern structures, almost as if it didn't want to be found. The building looked ancient, far older than anything else around it. The windows were covered in grime, and the brickwork was crumbling in places. But what really caught my attention was the door. It was a massive wooden door with iron hinges, and it stood slightly ajar, as if inviting anyone who dared to step inside. There was no sign, no name, nothing to indicate what the building had once been. I glanced around, expecting to see someone else nearby, maybe a caretaker or a worker. But the street was empty. It was just me and the building. Curiosity gripped me. There was something about the building that drew me in, almost like it was calling out to me. I took a few steps closer, staring at the door. The dim light from the overcast sky barely penetrated inside, casting long shadows across the threshold. I told myself I would just take a quick look. After all, it was just an old building. What harm could there be in that? But as I stood there, something felt off. There was a heaviness in the air, a quietness that wasn't quite normal. It felt like the building had been forgotten, left behind by time itself. And yet, it was still waiting for someone like me to find it. I knew it wasn't a good idea, but curiosity had always been my weakness. And that day, I was too curious for my own good. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the door. I stood in front of the old building, staring at the open door, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and hesitation. I knew better than to walk into random, abandoned places. Everything I'd ever read or heard warned against it. Stories about trespassing, hidden dangers, or worse. Places like this didn't have good reputations. But still, something about it pulled me in, like a dare whispered in the back of my mind. I remembered the stories people told about buildings like this, places left untouched, their histories forgotten by everyone except the few brave or foolish enough to explore them. And I wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Part of me told myself it was just an old building, nothing more, nothing less. The city was full of them, buildings that had been left to rot after being replaced by newer, shinier structures. But this one felt different. It didn't just look abandoned, it felt off. Like it wasn't meant to be found, not even by accident. I couldn't explain it, but there was something almost thrilling about the idea of stepping inside. It wasn't just curiosity that was driving me. It was the feeling that this was something nobody else had seen in a long time. It was my chance to uncover a forgotten part of the city's history, something hidden from the everyday hustle of life in London. It was a mystery waiting to be solved, and I was right at the edge of it. As I stood there, another thought popped into my mind. What if I was the only one who had noticed this place? It was tucked away so perfectly between two buildings that you could walk by 100 times and never see it. What if nobody else had dared to explore it? The idea of being the first, or one of the few, gave me a strange sense of excitement. It felt like an adventure, something that would break the routine of my everyday life. A part of me knew it was probably a terrible idea, but when faced with an opportunity like this, how could I walk away? I glanced around one more time, checking for any signs of warning. No trespassing signs, no locked gates, nothing. The only thing that stood between me and the building was my own hesitation. That's when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to turn back now. I told myself I'd just take a quick look inside just to see what it was like. After all, what harm could a few steps into an old building do? It wasn't like it was haunted, and I wasn't scared of a little dust and darkness. Ignoring the small voice in my head that told me to reconsider, I stepped closer to the door. It creaked slightly as I pushed it open wider. My heart pounded, but not out of fear, out of excitement. This was a dare I couldn't resist. I took a deep breath, crossed the threshold, and stepped into the unknown. As I crossed the threshold into the building, a shiver ran down my spine. The door creaked shut behind me with a heavy thud, sealing me inside. I was instantly enveloped in a musty darkness that smelled of mildew and decay. The air felt thick and stale, as if it had been trapped here for years, untouched by the outside world. I paused for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Dust particles danced lazily in the beams of light, floating like tiny ghosts in the still air. The floor beneath my feet creaked ominously with each step I took, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on something that had long been forgotten. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, once elegant but now faded and torn, revealing the bare wood underneath. Shadows lurked in every corner, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed somewhere in the distance, adding to the eerie atmosphere. I could hear my own breathing, quickening in the silence as I took in the surroundings. Every step felt like a journey back in time. Old furniture, draped in white sheets, stood scattered throughout the room, as if the previous inhabitants had simply vanished. A tattered armchair leaned against a wall, and a dusty table sat in the center, covered with a layer of grime. It was as if I had walked into a scene frozen in time, a place where stories waited to be discovered. I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation, my heart racing as I moved deeper into the building. The further I ventured, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift, becoming heavier, almost oppressive. A cold breeze swept through the hallway, making me shiver despite my determination. With each passing moment, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself to this strange, forgotten place. My mind raced with questions. Who had lived here? What had happened to them? Why had they left everything behind? The building seemed to whisper secrets, begging me to uncover its past. I could hear faint scuttling noises echoing through the walls, perhaps the sound of rats or something more sinister. My imagination began to run wild, conjuring images of shadowy figures lurking just beyond my sight. But I pushed those thoughts aside. I was here to explore, to satisfy the curiosity that had driven me inside. As I continued down the corridor, the atmosphere thickened. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and I could almost hear the building's heartbeat, a slow, steady thrum that matched the pounding in my chest. I knew I was stepping into the unknown, and it thrilled me. The excitement of discovery was intoxicating, overshadowing my fear. I found myself in a larger room, and as I turned to take in my surroundings, I noticed something out of place. A large mirror hanging on the wall, its surface tarnished and cracked. It felt oddly out of place, like a window to another time. I stepped closer, compelled to look into it, and for a moment I forgot about the dangers that might lie ahead. But as I leaned in, my reflection seemed to ripple, distorting for just a heartbeat before settling back into place. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly stepped back, shaking off the strange sensation. There was something unsettling about that mirror, something that hinted at stories buried deep within these walls. The thrill of adventure surged through me again as I took a deep breath, ready to delve deeper into the heart of the building. Little did I know, each step I took was leading me closer to the secrets that awaited, secrets that might be better left undiscovered. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart as I wandered deeper into the abandoned building. The air felt colder now, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could almost hear the silence, an unsettling, heavy quiet that pressed against my ears. But then, as I ventured further into the darkness, something caught my attention. A soft sound drifted through the stillness, like a whisper just out of reach. I froze, straining to hear it clearly. The whisper seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the building, a fleeting sound that sent chills down my spine. It was a faint voice, almost like someone was trying to speak to me, but I couldn't make out the words. I felt a mixture of curiosity and dread wash over me. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling in the oppressive silence. The moment the word left my lips, the whisper faded into the shadows, leaving an unsettling emptiness behind. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a sense of unease creeping in. Was it just my imagination playing tricks on me, or had I really heard something? As I continued to move cautiously, the whisper returned, softer this time, yet distinctly present. It seemed to come from the room at the end of the hallway, shrouded in darkness. My feet moved instinctively, pulling me toward it despite the growing anxiety gnawing at my insides. Each step felt heavier, the air growing thicker around me as I approached. When I reached the door, I paused, my heart pounding in my chest. The handle was cold to the touch, and I hesitated for a moment, torn between the desire to know what lay beyond and the instinct to turn back. The whispers swirled in my mind, a haunting melody that coaxed me forward. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to see what was inside. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. It creaked ominously, revealing a room cloaked in shadows. The faint light from the hallway barely illuminated the corners, leaving them dark and foreboding. As I stepped inside, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a wind that carried secrets I was not meant to hear. I strained to make sense of the voices, but they were muffled, almost drowned out by my own heartbeat. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and I could feel the weight of the building pressing down on me. I felt as if I was being watched, as if the very structure held its breath, waiting for me to take another step. Suddenly, a gust of cold air rushed past me, sending a shiver through my body. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing there, only the darkness that loomed behind me. The whispers faded again, replaced by an unsettling silence that felt almost mocking. It was as if the building itself had conspired to draw me in, only to leave me alone in my fear. Determined not to let my imagination get the best of me, I moved further into the room. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing dusty furniture and faded photographs hanging crookedly on the walls. Yet something felt off, like the room was not just abandoned but was waiting for something to happen. In the corner, a tall wardrobe stood, its doors slightly ajar. I could feel a pull toward it, a curiosity that mingled with dread. But as I stepped closer, the whispers returned, clearer now, but still just out of reach. I could sense the urgency in the sound, a warning that sent a chill down my spine. Don't, the voice seemed to say, but the words were swallowed by the shadows, leaving me with only the lingering fear that gripped my heart. I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Was I really ready to uncover whatever secret lay hidden within these walls? Or would the whispers lead me to a danger I couldn't escape? As I stood there, the air thick with tension, I knew that something had changed. I was no longer just an explorer. I was a part of the building's story, and the danger lurking within was all too real. I stood frozen in the dimly lit room, my heart hammering against my chest as I listened intently. The whispers had faded, replaced by an unsettling silence that made every breath feel like a mistake. But then, just as I began to regain my composure, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound echoing from somewhere deep within the building. Footsteps. They were faint at first, like a distant heartbeat pulsing through the stillness. I strained to listen, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. My heart raced as I realized the sound was getting closer, echoing off the walls in a way that felt almost deliberate. It was as if someone or something was moving about in the shadows, just out of sight. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice wavering. The footsteps paused, as if responding to my call, and a cold chill swept through the room. I glanced back at the door, my instinct urging me to flee. But curiosity tugged at me, drawing me deeper into the mystery of the abandoned building. I took a cautious step forward, each movement accompanied by the ominous echoes of the footsteps. They had transformed into a cacophony of noise, reverberating through the hallways like a warning. I felt trapped, the air thickening with tension as I pondered the possibility that I was not alone. As I ventured further, the footsteps grew louder, more distinct. They were no longer soft whispers, but heavy, deliberate steps that thudded against the floor. My heart raced faster, each beat echoing in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever, or whoever, was making those sounds was aware of me, watching my every move. I moved cautiously toward the hallway from which the sound originated, my breath shallow and uneven. The shadows danced around me, twisting and turning in the dim light as I pressed forward. Every step I took felt like an invitation to something unknown and terrifying. Then, just as I reached the threshold of the hallway, the footsteps stopped completely. An eerie silence enveloped me, and I strained to hear any sign of movement. It felt like the building itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. The silence was suffocating, filled with an unspoken tension that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang from one of the rooms down the hall, a door slamming shut with a force that rattled the walls. I jumped, my heart racing as adrenaline coursed through my veins. I had to know what was going on, but a primal fear clawed at my mind, urging me to turn back. Maybe I should leave. I whispered to myself, but the words felt weak and unconvincing. I took a step back, ready to retreat, but my curiosity won out. I couldn't leave now, not when the mystery felt so alive, so tantalizingly close. Gathering my courage, I pushed forward again, each step echoing loudly in the silence. The air grew colder as I approached the door from which the sound had come. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling as I turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a dark room beyond. The shadows seemed to reach out to me, and as I stepped inside, I heard it again, the footsteps. This time, they were right behind me, almost a whisper away. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I was alone, or so it seemed. The noise continued, though, echoing in my ears, drawing me deeper into the room. I glanced back at the doorway, my instincts screaming at me to run, but the compulsion to understand what was happening was too strong. The footsteps became louder, an ominous reminder that something was near, just beyond my sight. I felt a sense of dread wash over me as I stepped further into the darkness. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside heightened my anxiety. I was in the heart of the building now, and the echoes of footsteps surrounded me, a reminder that I had crossed a line, one I could never uncross. And then, as if the building itself had heard my thoughts, the footsteps stopped once more. I stood in the oppressive silence, my heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. But what? What awaited me in the depths of this abandoned place? Suddenly, the hairs on my neck prickled, and I felt an unmistakable presence behind me. A breathless whisper rushed past my ear, chilling me to the bone. I turned slowly, my heart racing, and that's when I realized the footsteps were no longer echoes. They were real. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped in a web of uncertainty and dread. The whispers, the footsteps, the heavy silence, they all felt like layers of a trap closing in around me. I turned back to the room, desperate to find a way out, but the door I had entered through now appeared more like a barrier than an escape route. As I moved back toward it, the atmosphere thickened, and a wave of unease washed over me. I reached for the doorknob, but it felt cold and unyielding in my grasp. I twisted it, but it wouldn't budge. A rush of panic flooded my mind. Had it locked behind me? I pressed against the door with all my weight, but it remained stubbornly shut. I took a deep breath to calm myself, scanning the room for another exit. The dim light flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced like specters along the walls. My heart raced as I searched for a way out, each passing second amplifying my sense of isolation. The room was cluttered with forgotten furniture, tattered chairs, a dusty table, and stacks of old newspapers that were yellowed with age. I moved cautiously, stepping around the debris, my eyes darting around for any sign of an escape. As I explored the room, I could feel the temperature dropping, the chill creeping into my bones. I was acutely aware of the darkness lurking in the corners, as if it were watching me, waiting. I turned to the far side of the room and noticed another door, slightly ajar, its frame barely visible in the dim light. Hope flickered within me, and I approached it with a mix of anticipation and fear. As I reached for the handle, I heard a sudden creaking sound behind me, like the floorboards protesting under an unseen weight. I whipped around, my breath hitching in my throat. The room felt alive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows. Taking a step back, I hesitated for a moment, listening intently. The echoes of my breathing mingled with the distant sounds of creaking wood and rustling paper. I had to move, had to find an exit before whatever was haunting this place found me. I returned my attention to the door and pulled it open slowly, wincing at the noise it made. The room beyond was darker than the one I had just left, a void that swallowed the light. I stepped inside, squinting to see anything in the gloom. The air felt heavier here, thick with dust and the smell of decay. I took a tentative step forward, but my foot hit something solid. I looked down to find a pile of old boxes stacked haphazardly in the corner. As I maneuvered around the boxes, I noticed something strange, another locked door at the far end of the room. My heart sank. How many doors were there in this building that wouldn't open? I felt an urge to pound my fists against the wood, to shout for help, but the fear of drawing attention to myself kept me silent. In that moment, I heard it again. The footsteps. This time, they were louder, echoing through the darkness, reverberating off the walls and closing in on me. My breath quickened, and I felt a primal instinct to flee. I turned back to the first door, my hands trembling as I twisted the knob once more. It still wouldn't budge. My frustration boiled over, and I kicked at the door, the sound echoing sharply through the silence. Suddenly, the footsteps halted, and an eerie stillness fell over the room. It was as if the entire building had paused, waiting with bated breath. My pulse raced as I held my breath, straining to hear anything. A rustle, a whisper, a sign of movement. The silence felt suffocating, and I fought the urge to scream. Then, without warning, the lights above flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. I stumbled backward, heart pounding in my chest. The flickering made the shadows shift and twist around me, creating a distorted world that felt hostile and alive. Just then, I heard a faint scraping sound, like nails running against wood, coming from the locked door at the end of the room. My skin crawled. Curiosity battled with fear, and against my better judgment, I approached the locked door, straining to hear more clearly. Was something trying to get out? Or was it simply the echoes of my own anxiety playing tricks on me? I pressed my ear against the cold, splintered wood, holding my breath as I listened. The scraping stopped suddenly, replaced by an unsettling silence. I stepped back, a chill racing down my spine as I felt the weight of the room pressing in on me. I glanced back at the other door, my thoughts racing. Should I stay and investigate, or should I find a way to escape? The choice hung heavy in the air, a question that would define my fate in this forgotten building. With the flickering light above me casting frantic shadows, I knew I had to make a decision. The darkness seemed to beckon me closer, while the locked doors mocked my desperation. Would I uncover the mystery behind this building, or would I become just another story whispered about in the shadows? As I stood there in the dim light, the oppressive silence grew heavier, wrapping around me like a thick fog. My pulse throbbed in my ears, and the shadows seemed to deepen, shifting with a life of their own. The air felt charged with something I couldn't quite name, a sense of foreboding that prickled at the back of my mind, warning me that all was not as it seemed. I glanced around the room, taking stock of my surroundings again. Everything appeared untouched, covered in a thick layer of dust, yet the atmosphere felt alive with unseen eyes watching from the corners. I stepped back toward the locked door, my fingers trembling against the splintered wood. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. I was not just trapped in an abandoned building. I was ensnared in a place that held secrets, memories of its own. The ominous footsteps, the whispers that echoed in the dark, what if they were not just figments of my imagination? What if they belonged to someone who had once walked these halls? A shiver ran down my spine as the thought settled in. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the unease that clawed at my mind. "Get a grip," I muttered under my breath, attempting to ground myself. But the whispers returned, a chorus of muffled voices swirling around me, echoing with something I couldn't quite understand. I stepped closer to the window, hoping to let in some light. I pulled aside the dusty curtain, expecting to see the busy streets of London beyond. But instead, I was greeted by an expanse of darkness. The streetlights outside flickered, casting strange shadows against the building's crumbling facade, and I could barely make out the shapes of nearby structures. Something was off. I squinted, leaning closer to the window. There were no cars passing, no sounds of life, just an unsettling silence that felt wrong for a city that was always alive. My stomach churned, and an icy knot formed in my gut. The outside world felt distant, almost like it was a figment of my imagination, while I was trapped in a bubble of eerie isolation. I turned back to the room, scanning the cluttered floor for anything that might provide a clue to what was happening. But as I looked around, the unsettling truth struck me again. There was no sign of anyone ever having lived here. No personal belongings, no photos, nothing to suggest that this space had been anything but a forgotten relic of the past. As I began to pace the room, I noticed a large, ornate mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. Its surface was clouded with grime, but something compelled me to approach it. I wiped the dust away with my sleeve, revealing a reflection that momentarily shocked me. The room behind me was cast in soft light, yet in the mirror it appeared darker, more foreboding. And then it hit me. The reflection wasn't just a reflection, it was different. The space behind me seemed distorted, as if the mirror were showing a version of the room that had not existed for years. I leaned closer, my breath fogging up the surface, and as I did, I thought I saw movement in the corner of the reflection. I jerked back, heart racing. "Is someone there?" I called out, but my voice trembled, and the sound felt swallowed by the darkness. The echo of my own words seemed to mock me, reverberating back with an unsettling finality. I stepped away from the mirror, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. What was happening to me? My mind raced with possibilities, but deep down I knew I had to stay focused. The fear gripping my heart was real, but I couldn't allow it to paralyze me. I forced myself to remember why I had come here in the first place. I had wanted to explore, to satisfy my curiosity, but this was no longer an adventure. It had morphed into something far more sinister. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind felt like a warning, a reminder that I was treading on dangerous ground. As I turned to face the room again, a movement caught my eye, a shadow flickering at the edge of my vision. I whipped around, searching the dark corners, but there was nothing there. The air grew heavy, thick with tension, and I could feel it pressing down on me. Something wasn't right, and I was beginning to understand that whatever had brought me here was not going to let me leave easily. The reality of my situation sank in, and I felt the walls closing in around me, every heartbeat echoing my growing sense of dread. With every passing second, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the building itself had come alive, absorbing my fear and feeding off it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the rising panic. I couldn't let fear control me. I had to find a way out of this nightmare before it consumed me entirely. As I moved cautiously back toward the exit, the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. Whatever lay beyond those locked doors, whatever had been awakened within these walls, I felt that I had to confront it. But a chilling realization settled in my gut. I may not be prepared for the truth hidden within this abandoned building. The atmosphere inside the building grew increasingly oppressive as I approached the door I had entered through. My heart raced, a wild drumbeat echoing in my ears as I reached for the handle, but the moment my fingers brushed against the cold metal, I froze. The door wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, feeling the rough wood splinter under my grip, but it felt as if something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic clawed at my chest, and I took a step back, my eyes darting around the room in desperation. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken threats that whispered to me from the shadows. I turned to the other exits I had noticed when I first entered. There had been a staircase leading to the upper floors, and a narrow hallway that promised a way out, but now they seemed to fade into obscurity, shrouded in darkness. My mind raced with thoughts of how I could have missed them. How could the paths I had planned to take disappear so suddenly? I moved to the hallway, my heart pounding louder with each step. The floorboards creaked beneath me, a groan of protest echoing through the silence. The hallway stretched on, seemingly endless and swallowed by shadows. I felt the walls close in around me, a suffocating reminder of how trapped I really was. "What's happening?" I whispered to myself, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. I couldn't afford to panic, not now. My thoughts raced as I considered my options. I could head back to the room I had just left or explore deeper into this maze of despair. But something told me that retreating would only lead to more uncertainty. I chose to continue down the hallway. The darkness loomed around me, swallowing any slivers of light that dared to peek through the dust-covered windows. The air grew colder, and I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. It felt as if the very building was breathing, its walls alive with secrets, watching my every move. After a few moments of walking, I came across a door, slightly ajar. Hope surged through me. Maybe this was the way out. I approached it cautiously, my heart thudding in my chest. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest, and was met with a small, dimly lit room. The atmosphere inside was thick with dust, and the air smelled stale. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, remnants of what had once been a welcoming space. I stepped inside, glancing around, searching for another exit. But as I looked closer, despair settled in again. This room led nowhere. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I noticed a strange sensation creeping up my spine. It felt like a gaze upon me, heavy and unyielding. I turned slowly, scanning the room. Nothing moved, but I could feel something was watching, lurking in the corners of my vision. "Get it together," I whispered fiercely, trying to shake off the unease. I pushed the door open and stepped back into the hallway, determined to find a way out. But as I continued down the corridor, I realized that the path ahead was growing darker and more twisted. Each door I passed seemed to lead to another dead end. Frustration bubbled within me. "Why can't I find an exit?" I shouted into the emptiness, my voice echoing back at me. The silence that followed felt deafening, swallowing my question and leaving only my desperation in return. I pressed on, my heart racing faster with every step. I came upon another staircase, this one spiraling down into the depths of the building. Despite my better judgment, I felt drawn to it. Maybe there was a way out below. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to keep moving, to keep searching for an escape, no matter how risky it might be. I descended the staircase, each step echoing ominously in the dark. The air grew colder, wrapping around me like a shroud, and I shivered uncontrollably. As I reached the bottom, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor that stretched out into darkness. It felt like a tunnel, a passageway leading me deeper into the heart of the abandoned structure. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but the feeling of desperation was stronger. I needed to find a way out, and I couldn't give up now. I pressed forward, the sound of my footsteps reverberating through the empty space. I could feel my breath coming in quick bursts, a reminder that I was still alive, still fighting against the overwhelming fear that threatened to consume me. As I ventured deeper, I noticed that the corridor branched off into several other paths, each cloaked in darkness. I could feel panic rising again, a tight knot forming in my stomach. Which way should I go? Would any of these paths lead me back to the exit, or was I only venturing further into a trap? In a moment of hesitation, I closed my eyes and listened. Silence surrounded me, broken only by the faint echo of my own breathing. But then, from somewhere deep within the building, I heard a sound, a soft rustling, like whispers carried on the wind. My heart leaped in my chest as I strained to listen. The whispers seemed to beckon me, leading me down one of the corridors. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, feeling the pull of something hidden in the shadows. I had to know what was waiting for me. But as I moved forward, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me in a cacophony of voices. I stumbled, disoriented, trying to decipher the words that flitted just beyond my comprehension. My breath quickened, and I felt a surge of panic as the realization sank in. I was not alone in this building. Something was here with me, lurking in the dark, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. And with every step I took deeper into the building, the chance of finding an exit slipped further away. The walls of the corridor seemed to close in, and I could feel the very essence of the place pressing against me, a reminder of the danger that lay just beyond my sight. As I pressed forward, a heavy weight of desperation settled in my chest. I needed to escape this place before whatever shadows haunted it decided to make themselves known. But with each passing moment, I could feel the escape routes slipping further from my grasp, leaving me to confront the unknown that awaited me in the dark. The darkness of the corridor felt more oppressive than ever as I ventured deeper into the building. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence that wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. My heart thudded in my chest, echoing loudly in my ears, as I struggled to steady my breathing. I could feel my instincts screaming at me to turn back, to escape this place while I still could, but something, curiosity perhaps, kept me moving forward. As I continued along the corridor, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I paused, my breath hitching in my throat, and turned my head toward the corner of the hallway. There, in the faint light filtering through a grimy window, I saw a shadow lurking just beyond my reach. It was fleeting, just a glimpse, but it sent a chill down my spine. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a trick of the light, or was there something or someone hiding in the darkness? My heart pounded as I strained to see more clearly, hoping to catch another glimpse of whatever had stirred in the corner. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering as it broke the suffocating silence. "Is anyone there?" The echo of my words bounced back at me, but there was no answer, just the haunting stillness that enveloped the corridor. I took a cautious step forward, my pulse racing. The shadow seemed to shift, disappearing deeper into the recesses of the hallway. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, but the curiosity gnawed at me, pushing me forward. What if someone was trapped in here? What if they needed help? I took another step, my feet hesitant against the old floorboards which creaked under my weight. The air felt thick, heavy, with an unnamable tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I squinted into the darkness, trying to discern any detail, but all I could see was the encroaching shadows. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw it again, a flicker of movement, this time more distinct. A figure emerged from the darkness, standing at the end of the corridor. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its features obscured, but I could make out the outline of a person, tall and still, as if watching me. A wave of panic washed over me. Who was this person? Were they another explorer or something far more sinister? I took a step back, my heart racing faster, but the figure didn't move. It remained there, motionless, like a statue carved from darkness. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Suddenly, the figure began to move. It stepped forward, slowly and deliberately, and my breath quickened as I took another step back, my instincts urging me to flee. But there was nowhere to go. I was trapped in this hallway, with the shadow closing in on me. "Please, don't come any closer," I stammered, feeling the weight of my fear press down on me. The figure paused, and for a moment, the silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then it spoke, a low, gravelly voice that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here." The words dripped with warning, a dark promise that sent shivers coursing through my veins. In that moment, all my earlier bravado evaporated, leaving only raw fear. I turned and bolted back down the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs as I sprinted toward the staircase. The echoes of my footsteps mingled with the sound of the figure's approach behind me, a reminder that I was not alone in this forsaken building. As I raced down the stairs, my mind raced with thoughts of escape. The exit had to be somewhere, some way out of this nightmare. The shadows danced around me, but I couldn't look back. I had to keep moving. Finally, I burst into the large room I had first entered, gasping for breath. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape. The door I had entered through was still tightly shut, and I felt a wave of despair crash over me. I couldn't go back that way, not with whatever that figure was lurking in the dark. My eyes fell on another door at the far end of the room. It was slightly ajar, and a thin sliver of light seeped through the crack. Without a second thought, I rushed toward it, praying it would lead me to freedom. As I reached the door, I pushed it open and stumbled into another corridor. The air was cooler here, and the oppressive weight of the darkness seemed to lift just a little. I took a moment to catch my breath, my heart still racing as I leaned against the wall, trying to calm my thoughts. But the sense of safety was short-lived. A loud bang echoed from the large room I had just left, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. My heart sank. The figure was following me. I turned and bolted down the new corridor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to close in around me, the shadows stretching like fingers reaching out to snatch me back. I had to find a way out before whatever darkness hunted me caught up. The stakes had never felt higher, and every instinct screamed at me to run faster. The whispers of the building grew louder, blending with the sound of my pounding heart, creating a cacophony of dread that pushed me onward. I had to escape this place, before it claimed me too. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I sprinted down the corridor, the sound of footsteps echoing ominously behind me. Each beat of my heart felt like a countdown, urging me to run faster, to escape whatever dark presence was trailing so closely. The cold air rushed past me, but it did little to calm the fiery panic igniting in my chest. I turned a sharp corner, praying the figure wouldn't be able to keep up with me. I could hear it, heavy footsteps thudding against the floor, a sinister rhythm that matched my own racing heart. With every step, the fear grew, wrapping around me like a vice. I glanced over my shoulder, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of that dark silhouette emerging from the shadows. My breath hitched. It was closer than I had anticipated. "Please, just let me get out of here," I muttered to myself, desperate words barely audible over the noise of my own footfalls. The urgency of the moment pressed down on me, demanding every ounce of strength I had left. The corridor seemed endless, stretching into an abyss of darkness and dread. I turned another corner, eyes darting for any sign of an exit. To my left, I spotted a door, slightly ajar and flickering with light. Hope surged within me. That had to be it, the way out. Without a second thought, I lunged toward it, shoving the door open with all my might. As I stepped inside, I found myself in a small storage room filled with dusty boxes and broken furniture. It was cramped and suffocating, but it offered a momentary refuge. I quickly closed the door behind me, holding my breath as I listened for any signs of pursuit. The footsteps outside paused, and I could hear nothing but the thudding of my heart and the shallow rasp of my breath. My palms were slick with sweat, and I leaned against the cool wall, trying to steady myself. I had to think clearly. I couldn't let panic overwhelm me. I needed a plan. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the door I had just shut. The figure was trying to force it open. My heart raced anew, and I knew I had to act quickly. I scanned the room for anything I could use. My eyes landed on a metal pipe lying in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I grabbed it tightly, feeling its weight anchor me as I prepared for whatever was about to happen. The door rattled violently, and I pressed my back against the wall, feeling a rush of terror flood through me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, but there was nowhere else to go. The figure outside was relentless, slamming against the door with a force that shook the room. "Please, just go away," I shouted, my voice cracking as desperation clawed at me. The door shuttered again, and a small crack appeared at the hinges. I realized that it wouldn't hold for long. As if in answer to my plea, the door flew open with a deafening crash, slamming against the wall. The figure stood there, framed in the doorway, its dark silhouette more menacing than I had imagined. My breath caught in my throat. An instinct kicked in, fight or flight. With a surge of adrenaline, I charged forward, swinging the metal pipe with all my might. It connected with a dull thud against the figure's shoulder, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it stepped forward, unfazed by the blow. I stumbled back, my mind racing as I realized that whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. Panic surged within me as I turned and bolted past it, desperate to find another way out. The figure lurched after me, its movements fluid and unnaturally fast. I dashed through the storage room, eyes wide with terror, searching for any means of escape. I spotted a window at the far end, partially obscured by boxes. Without hesitation, I rushed toward it, feeling the figure's breath on my neck as I moved. The window was locked, but I didn't have time to think. I slammed my shoulder against it, the glass rattling as I fought to pry it open. The figure was closing in, and I could hear its footsteps thundering behind me. With one final push, the window gave way, and I flung it open, just as the shadow reached out for me. I scrambled up onto the ledge, my legs trembling as I prepared to leap into the unknown. I took a deep breath and jumped. The air rushed past me as I fell, the world blurring into a whirlwind of panic and fear. I hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact, and scrambled to my feet. I looked back, half expecting to see the figure following me, but it was gone, vanished back into the darkness of the building. Heart racing, I took off down the street, away from that cursed building. Each step felt like a victory, the adrenaline fueling my escape. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where the distant sound of traffic and the comforting glow of streetlights surrounded me. I paused for a moment, leaning against a lamppost to catch my breath, feeling the weight of fear slowly lift. I had escaped, but at what cost? The memory of that dark figure haunted me, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of abandoned places. As I glanced back at the looming structure, a shiver ran down my spine. I knew I would never forget the night I dared to explore the unknown, nor the shadow that had chased me into the depths of fear. I had been lucky, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there were others still trapped within its walls, unaware of the dangers lurking just beyond their reach. As I stood there, catching my breath, the reality of what I had just escaped washed over me. The rush of adrenaline was fading, replaced by a chilling sense of dread. I knew I couldn't leave without knowing more about that abandoned building, what had driven me to enter in the first place, and what kind of horrors lay within its walls. With a firm resolve, I turned back toward the building, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity clawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important I needed to uncover, something that tied me to that dark place. Perhaps it was the sheer eeriness of it all, or the haunting shadow that had chased me, but I felt compelled to learn more. I started my search for answers, digging into the building's history. My first stop was the local library, a cozy spot filled with the comforting scent of old books and dusty shelves. As I sat at a small table, I pored over articles, newspapers, and local records, my eyes scanning for anything that could shed light on the mysterious structure. After several hours, I stumbled upon a faded newspaper article from decades ago. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearances Linked to Old Warehouse." My heart raced as I read the details. The article described how several people had vanished without a trace after venturing near the abandoned building, which had been a warehouse in its past. It had been a hub for shipping and receiving goods, but was shut down after a series of strange incidents. As I continued to read, my stomach twisted in knots. Rumors began to circulate about the warehouse being haunted, linked to the disappearances. Local residents spoke of strange noises, shadowy figures, and unsettling occurrences surrounding the property. It was said that anyone who dared to enter might never come back out. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The very building I had explored was connected to these mysterious vanishings. The shadow I had encountered was no mere figment of my imagination. It was part of a much darker history that had haunted this place for years. Flipping through more pages, I found a photo of the warehouse, a crumbling structure that looked far more menacing than I remembered. There were faint silhouettes of figures standing near the entrance, their faces obscured, but their postures conveyed a sense of dread. My hands shook as I traced the outline of the building in the photograph, feeling an unsettling connection to the shadows in the picture. Then, I stumbled upon a diary entry from a local historian who had investigated the building many years ago. The historian wrote about strange occurrences, hearing whispers, feeling an inexplicable chill, and even witnessing shadows darting past him as he explored. The entry concluded with a warning: do not underestimate the darkness within. It holds secrets best left untouched. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. This was the very same warning that echoed in my mind as I had ventured into the building. The shadow I encountered wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was part of something far more sinister. After hours of research, I left the library with a heavy heart and a newfound sense of urgency. I knew I had to return to the building, but this time it was to uncover the truth, not to explore for thrills, but to understand the darkness that lay within. I had to face my fears and confront whatever lay hidden in the shadows. As night fell, I made my way back to the abandoned warehouse, armed with only a flashlight and a sense of determination. The air was thick with anticipation, and the eerie quiet settled around me like a shroud. I felt the weight of the building's history pressing down on me, and as I stepped through the creaking entrance, the darkness welcomed me like an old friend. I wandered through the corridors, recalling the chilling details from my research. Each step felt heavier, as if the very ground I walked on was steeped in the memories of those who had vanished. My flashlight beam flickered against the walls, casting shadows that danced and twisted, echoing the fear and uncertainty that pulsed through me. As I explored deeper, I stumbled upon an old office, cluttered with dust-covered files and faded photographs. Among the papers, I found a file marked "Missing Persons," containing photos and descriptions of those who had disappeared. Each face looked familiar, and my heart sank as I realized they were locals I had seen around town. people whose lives had been swallowed by the building's dark history. Then, my gaze fell upon a photograph of a young woman, her smile bright and innocent. Her name was Emily Carter, and the date on the report was only a few years old. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I remembered her. She had lived just a few blocks away and was known for her warm spirit and kindness. How had she ended up here? As I dug deeper into the files, I uncovered more disturbing details about her last known whereabouts. Emily had last been seen near the warehouse, her friends reporting that she had gone inside after hearing strange noises. A sense of dread filled me as I realized that she was one of the latest victims of the building's sinister hold. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere within the depths of the warehouse, shattering the oppressive silence. My heart raced, and I instinctively gripped my flashlight tighter. I wasn't alone. Whatever had taken Emily might still be here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I followed the sound, my pulse pounding in my ears. I knew I had to confront whatever was inside the building, if not for my sake, then for Emily and the others who had been lost to its darkness. As I turned a corner, I was met with a vast room filled with old machinery, rusted and covered in dust. In the center, a figure stood, silhouetted against the dim light filtering through broken windows. My breath caught in my throat as the shadow turned, revealing a face that was both familiar and terrifying. It was Emily, but she was different. Her eyes were hollow, and her smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of deep sorrow. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, her voice echoing eerily in the cavernous space. I took a step back, confusion and fear swirling within me. "Emily? What happened to you?" I could barely form the words, overwhelmed by the sight of her standing before me, yet feeling an undeniable distance between us. "The building, it doesn't let you go," she said softly, her gaze distant. "It feeds on fear, and once you're inside, it holds you forever." A chill ran down my spine as I processed her words. The stories, the disappearances, they were all real. The building had ensnared her and countless others, trapping their souls in a never-ending cycle of fear and despair. "Please," I begged, desperation creeping into my voice. "How do I help you? How do I escape this place?" Emily's expression darkened, a flicker of regret passing over her face. "You must face the darkness. It's the only way to break the hold it has over you. You have to let go of your fear." But how could I let go of my fear when the very essence of the building was rooted in it? As I struggled with her words, a low rumble reverberated through the room, shaking the ground beneath me. The walls seemed to close in, darkness creeping closer. "I can't stay here," I whispered, fighting against the growing dread. "I need to escape." Emily reached out, her hand trembling. "You can do it. You have to believe. But you must hurry." Suddenly the darkness surged around me, swallowing the light and wrapping me in a suffocating embrace. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I was losing my grip on reality, the shadows threatening to consume me whole. I took a deep breath, focusing on Emily's words. I had to confront my fear. With every ounce of strength, I closed my eyes and envisioned the light, the warmth of hope pushing back against the suffocating darkness. "I won't let you take me," I shouted, my voice cutting through the shadows. "I choose to be free." In that moment, a blinding light exploded around me, illuminating the darkness and pushing back the shadows. I felt the grip of fear loosen, and as I opened my eyes, the room transformed. The rusted machinery faded, and the building's oppressive atmosphere lifted. Emily smiled softly, her form becoming more ethereal, illuminated by the glow. "You've done it. You've broken the cycle," she whispered, her voice carrying a hint of relief. "Now go. Live." With a rush of wind, I was propelled backward, and the next thing I knew, I was outside the building, gasping for air as the cool night enveloped me. I looked back at the structure, which now appeared as a shadow of its former self, stripped of its menacing aura. I knew I had escaped, but the weight of the past lingered. The building still stood, a reminder of the darkness that had once held so many captive. Yet I felt a sense of hope, a promise that I could share the truth, honor those who had been lost, and perhaps help others avoid the fate that had nearly befallen me. As I walked away, the light of the moon guided my path, illuminating the way forward. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the life that awaited me beyond the shadows. The shadows around me felt alive, swirling with an energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. The moment I shouted, "I choose to be free," the building seemed to react, its walls trembling as if they were just as frightened as I was. I turned to run, but a heavy weight pressed against me, as if the darkness itself wanted to pull me back inside. With each step toward the exit, I felt the suffocating grip of fear clenched tighter around my throat. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe. I pushed against the invisible barrier, willing my legs to move faster. Behind me, I could hear the faint echo of footsteps, phantom sounds that made my heart race faster than ever. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shook violently, and debris rained down from the ceiling. The old walls groaned as if they were alive, and I could feel the building's anger rising. I stumbled, narrowly avoiding a falling beam, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to escape, but every instinct screamed at me to stop and look back. I took another glance over my shoulder. The shadowy figure of Emily flickered in and out of view, her face a mix of sorrow and determination. "Go!" she urged, her voice echoing in the darkness. "You must get out!" As I rounded the corner, a sudden burst of wind pushed me forward, and I crashed through the heavy wooden door that led outside. The cool night air hit me like a refreshing wave, but I barely had time to breathe before I felt something tug at my shirt. I turned, and to my horror, a dark tendril shot out from the doorway, grasping at my waist. It was as if the building itself was trying to pull me back into its depths. Panic surged through me, and I fought against the invisible grip, feeling my heart pound against my ribcage. "No," I shouted, yanking myself free from its hold. I stumbled backward, and my foot caught on a broken stone, sending me crashing to the ground. The tendril recoiled, but not before I felt it brush against my skin, icy and sharp. I quickly scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could see the dim light from the building behind me, the doorway now pulsating with a dark energy. The shadow of the building loomed ominously, and I knew I couldn't linger. I had to get away, far away. As I sprinted down the overgrown path leading away from the warehouse, adrenaline coursed through my veins. The night was still, too still, and it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I glanced back one last time, expecting to see the darkness following me, but the building stood silent, its presence growing faint. But then I felt it, a sudden chill creeping up my spine. It was as if the shadows had reached out beyond the building, trying to ensnare me even in my escape. I pressed on, my legs burning with the effort, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. As I reached the edge of the property, I stumbled and fell to my knees, gasping for air. I felt a sharp pain in my side, where the tendril had grazed me. I looked down to find a deep scratch, red and angry, a mark of my encounter with the darkness. It was a reminder of what I had faced, a testament to my narrow escape. I glanced back at the building, its silhouette now a mere shadow against the moonlit sky. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for Emily and the others who had been lost within its walls. They were forever trapped in the grip of the darkness that had nearly claimed me. But I was free now, at least for the moment. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking, and began to walk away. Each step felt heavy, weighed down by the knowledge of what had transpired. I couldn't forget the faces of those who had vanished, and I knew I had to share their stories. As I reached the road, the cool night air filled my lungs, a stark contrast to the stifling darkness of the building. I took a deep breath, knowing that I would never be the same after tonight. The shadows would always linger at the edges of my mind, but I had survived. I made my way to the nearest streetlight, its warm glow cutting through the night. I stopped and looked back one last time, but the building was now just a dark silhouette against the stars, a relic of fear that I had escaped. My heart still raced, but I felt a sense of resolve. I would tell my story, warn others, and ensure that the darkness within that building would not claim any more lives. I had faced my fear and emerged with scars, both visible and hidden. I knew I had a long journey ahead of me, but for now, I was free, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks after my escape from that abandoned building in London. The sun continued to rise and set, the world moved on, but I remained trapped in a cycle of fear and reflection. Each morning as I opened my eyes to the soft light streaming through my window, I would momentarily forget the horrors I had faced. But the moment my feet hit the floor, the memories came rushing back, a tidal wave of anxiety crashing over me. I could still feel the weight of that darkness lingering like a shadow at the back of my mind. The scratch on my side, though healing, was a constant reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. I avoided quiet places, fearing the echoes of my own footsteps would bring back those unsettling whispers. My heart would race at the slightest sound, every creak of the floorboards or rustle of leaves sending me spiraling into panic. I found myself jumping at shadows, questioning every corner and crevice as if something was waiting to leap out at me. I tried to regain a sense of normalcy, returning to my daily routine. I met friends for coffee, joined local clubs, and even attempted to lose myself in books. Yet every time I passed by a seemingly abandoned building or a dark alley, a chill would run down my spine. The memories of that night were etched in my mind like an unshakable tattoo. It wasn't just fear, it was a heavy cloak of paranoia that clung to me, suffocating my spirit. I began to jot down my thoughts in a journal, pouring out my fears onto the pages. Writing became a refuge, a way to confront the darkness that loomed over me. I wrote about the shadows, the whispers, and the feeling of being trapped. I documented every detail, every emotion, hoping to release the grip that the experience had on my life. I wrote about Emily, her haunting presence, a reminder that the darkness wasn't just a figment of my imagination. She was real, as were the lives that had been lost within those walls. With each entry, I felt a slight shift within myself. I began to understand that the fear would never fully dissipate. It was now a part of me, a piece of my history that I would carry. But instead of letting it consume me, I chose to wield it as a tool, a reminder to be cautious and aware. I realized that fear could be a powerful motivator, pushing me to seek out light in the darkest corners of my life. I made my way to the nearest streetlight, its warm glow cutting through the night. I stopped and looked back one last time, but the building was now just a dark silhouette against the stars, a relic of fear that I had escaped. My heart still raced, but I felt a sense of resolve. I would tell my story, warn others, and ensure that the darkness within that building would not claim any more lives. I had faced my fear and emerged with scars, both visible and hidden. I knew I had a long journey ahead of me, but for now, I was free, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks after my escape from that abandoned building in London. The sun continued to rise and set, the world moved on, but I remained trapped in a cycle of fear and reflection. Each morning as I opened my eyes to the soft light streaming through my window, I would momentarily forget the horrors I had faced. But the moment my feet hit the floor, the memories came rushing back, a tidal wave of anxiety crashing over me. I could still feel the weight of that darkness lingering like a shadow at the back of my mind. The scratch on my side, though healing, was a constant reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. I avoided quiet places, fearing the echoes of my own footsteps would bring back those unsettling whispers. My heart would race at the slightest sound, every creak of the floorboards or rustle of leaves sending me spiraling into panic. I found myself jumping at shadows, questioning every corner and crevice as if something was waiting to leap out at me. I tried to regain a sense of normalcy, returning to my daily routine. I met friends for coffee, joined local clubs, and even attempted to lose myself in books. Yet every time I passed by a seemingly abandoned building or a dark alley, a chill would run down my spine. The memories of that night were etched in my mind like an unshakable tattoo. It wasn't just fear, it was a heavy cloak of paranoia that clung to me, suffocating my spirit. I began to jot down my thoughts in a journal, pouring out my fears onto the pages. Writing became a refuge, a way to confront the darkness that loomed over me. I wrote about the shadows, the whispers, and the feeling of being trapped. I documented every detail, every emotion, hoping to release the grip that the experience had on my life. I wrote about Emily, her haunting presence, a reminder that the darkness wasn't just a figment of my imagination. She was real, as were the lives that had been lost within those walls. With each entry, I felt a slight shift within myself. I began to understand that the fear would never fully dissipate. It was now a part of me, a piece of my history that I would carry. But instead of letting it consume me, I chose to wield it as a tool, a reminder to be cautious and aware. I realized that fear could be a powerful motivator, pushing me to seek out light in the darkest corners of my life. As time passed, I decided to turn my experience into something positive. I contacted local community centers and offered to speak about my experience, hoping to raise awareness about the dangers of exploring abandoned places. I wanted others to understand the risks involved and the hidden histories that might be buried within those walls. I crafted my story carefully, sharing not just the horror but the lessons learned, the importance of listening to warnings, respecting boundaries, and recognizing that curiosity could lead to danger. The first time I stood before a group of people, my heart raced. I felt vulnerable, exposed, yet determined. I shared my story, the emotions flooding back as I recounted the night of terror. I could see the expressions on my audience's faces, some wide-eyed with shock, others nodding in understanding. When I finished, a wave of relief washed over me. I had faced my fears, and in sharing them, I felt lighter, as if the burden I had been carrying had been lifted. In the months that followed, I became more involved in community outreach, collaborating with local organizations to educate young people about the risks of exploring abandoned spaces. I shared my story at schools, youth groups, and local events, encouraging others to think critically before they ventured into unknown territories. Each time I spoke, I could feel my confidence growing, my fear transforming into strength. Yet even as I embraced this new purpose, the shadows still crept in. At night, I would lie awake, the silence of my room amplifying the memories of that dark building. I would remind myself of the journey I had taken, the lessons learned, and the importance of resilience. I practiced mindfulness, grounding myself in the present moment, refusing to let the past dictate my future. Eventually, I sought therapy to help process my experience further. I found comfort in discussing my feelings with someone who understood. It was a slow journey, but I learned valuable coping mechanisms to deal with anxiety and fear. I discovered the power of grounding techniques, focusing on my breath, counting my surroundings, and reminding myself that I was safe. Though the fear would always be a part of me, I learned to coexist with it, acknowledging its presence but refusing to let it control my life. I began to seek out new adventures, this time with caution and awareness. I hiked through parks, explored bustling markets, and wandered through vibrant neighborhoods, allowing myself to rediscover joy in exploration. As time passed, I decided to turn my experience into something positive. I contacted local community centers and offered to speak about my experience, hoping to raise awareness about the dangers of exploring abandoned places. I wanted others to understand the risks involved and the hidden histories that might be buried within those walls. I crafted my story carefully, sharing not just the horror but the lessons learned, the importance of listening to warnings, respecting boundaries, and recognizing that curiosity could lead to danger. The first time I stood before a group of people, my heart raced. I felt vulnerable, exposed, yet determined. I shared my story, the emotions flooding back as I recounted the night of terror. I could see the expressions on my audience's faces, some wide-eyed with shock, others nodding in understanding. When I finished, a wave of relief washed over me. I had faced my fears, and in sharing them, I felt lighter, as if the burden I had been carrying had been lifted. In the months that followed, I became more involved in community outreach, collaborating with local organizations to educate young people about the risks of exploring abandoned spaces. I shared my story at schools, youth groups, and local events, encouraging others to think critically before they ventured into unknown territories. Each time I spoke, I could feel my confidence growing, my fear transforming into strength. Yet even as I embraced this new purpose, the shadows still crept in. At night, I would lie awake, the silence of my room amplifying the memories of that dark building. I would remind myself of the journey I had taken, the lessons learned, and the importance of resilience. I practiced mindfulness, grounding myself in the present moment, refusing to let the past dictate my future. Eventually, I sought therapy to help process my experience further. I found comfort in discussing my feelings with someone who understood. It was a slow journey, but I learned valuable coping mechanisms to deal with anxiety and fear. I discovered the power of grounding techniques, focusing on my breath, counting my surroundings, and reminding myself that I was safe. Though the fear would always be a part of me, I learned to coexist with it, acknowledging its presence but refusing to let it control my life. I began to seek out new adventures, this time with caution and awareness. I hiked through parks, explored bustling markets, and wandered through vibrant neighborhoods, allowing myself to rediscover joy in exploration.